My name is Barbara. I am 66 years old. I suppose that's not an age most people would call young, but it's not old enough to be forgotten either. At least, it shouldn't be. But here I am, standing at the edge of my life, looking in from the outside. I often think back to the days when I was younger, when the house was full of laughter and the walls seemed to echo with life. Henry and I built this house, not just the walls, but everything inside it. The memories, the foundation, the family. For years it was our sanctuary, our place of peace. We had children, two of them. Daniel was the older one, always so serious, so full of plans. Lily was the younger one, a dreamer, always with her nose in a book or her mind wandering to places I couldn't always follow. But they were ours, and they were everything. Henry and I had the kind of relationship that people envied. We balanced each other perfectly. He was calm where I was passionate. He was patient where I rushed. Together, we raised our children. We held birthday parties, hosted Christmas dinners, and built a family unit that I thought could withstand anything. I thought our love would last forever, and in some ways it did. But time has a way of changing things. Henry died 10 years ago. Just like that, the heart of our home was gone. The house felt cold without him, and so did I. I never thought it would be like this, living without him. There was a silence in the house that couldn't be filled by any amount of dusting or cooking or the steady ticking of the clock on the wall. The children were always busy. They had their own lives, their own commitments. They promised they'd come back more often. "We'll visit, Mom. Don't worry." But as the years passed, those visits became fewer and fewer, and when they did come, it was never enough. They were always in a hurry, always distracted, always on their phones or talking about their jobs. It was like they were there, but not really there. At first, I was understanding. They had families of their own now, their own children to raise. I knew I wasn't as important as I once had been, but after a while, it started to sting. Every Christmas, I would wait by the phone, hoping for an invitation, hoping that someone would ask me to come. But every year, the phone calls became shorter, and the invitations, if I got one, felt more like a formality. They said they were busy, I would tell myself. They have families. It's understandable. I tried not to think too much about it. I tried to push away the feeling of being discarded, of becoming a relic of the past. But it was hard. Each Christmas, I told myself that this year would be different. This year, they would want me there. But year after year, I received the same answer. "Mom, it's just easier if you stay home. You're so far away. Don't tire yourself out." At first, I would smile and say, "It's okay. The main thing is that you're together." I would hang up the phone, my voice calm, but inside it felt like a weight was pressing down on me. I'd go through the motions, decorate the house, cook a nice meal, light a candle, but it never felt like Christmas anymore. The decorations, the music, the food, they were all just empty. And then the silence would settle in again. I would sit by myself, watching the flickering lights of the tree, and wonder when it had all slipped away. I'm not one to complain. I raised my children with love. I gave them everything I had. But over the years, I began to wonder if they had forgotten me, or worse, if they simply didn't care. It's funny how you can go from being the center of a family to a forgotten afterthought. And yet, every year, I would hold on to hope. Maybe this time, they would remember me. Maybe this time, things would be different. But each year, the same thing happened. I stayed alone, and they celebrated without me. The house felt colder and colder, but I kept it together. After all, who was I to ask for more? What had I really done to deserve more? I had tried to fill the emptiness with work, with hobbies, with volunteering. But at the end of the day, there was always that silence. I thought maybe I could bear it. Maybe I had to learn to be okay with being alone. But there were moments, quiet moments, when I couldn't ignore the truth. I had been forgotten, not in a malicious way, but in the way that happens when you stop being needed. And I wasn't sure how much longer I could accept that. I used to be someone. I used to be the one who made the meals, who held the family together. I used to be important. And yet here I was, just a woman who had outlived her purpose. This Christmas, something was different though. Something inside me had changed. For the first time in years, I wasn't going to let myself fade quietly into the background. This year, things would be different. But before I could even think about what that meant, I had to face something even harder, something I wasn't quite ready for. But sometimes, the truth has a way of making its presence known, no matter how much we try to ignore it. And this year, the truth was coming whether I was ready or not. It was last year, just before Christmas, when I overheard something that finally made me realize, truly realize, that things were never going to change. I had gone over to my daughter-in-law's house to drop off some cookies I'd baked. I thought perhaps I could stay for a while, have a cup of tea, and chat. But when I walked in, I saw something I wasn't expecting. My granddaughter, Lily's little girl, who was just 8 at the time, was sitting by the window, looking out at the snow falling softly to the ground. She was so still, almost too still for a child her age. I smiled and asked, "What's on your mind, sweetie?" She turned to look at me, her blue eyes wide with curiosity, and then she asked me a question that shattered whatever illusions I had left. "Grandma, why don't you ever come for Christmas?" I froze. I thought I had misheard her. But then she repeated it, as if it were the most natural thing to ask. "Why doesn't Grandma ever come?" Before I could answer, my daughter-in-law, Julia, walked in. She smiled and patted Lily's head. "Oh, honey, it's because Grandma is always sick around the holidays, remember?" Sick? The word hit me like a slap. I wasn't sick. I hadn't been sick for years. But there I was, being written off as just another problem, another inconvenience. Julia didn't even look at me when she said it. It was as if she had made up her mind long ago that I was just too much trouble. "I'm not sick," I said quietly, trying to sound casual, like it didn't matter. But it did matter. It mattered more than I could put into words. I looked at Julia, searching her face for some trace of remorse, some hint that she had noticed the hurt in my voice. But she was busy with something else, as usual. She didn't seem to care, and that's when I realized I was no longer a part of their world. I wasn't sick. I wasn't even old enough to need pity. I was just forgotten, crossed out, like an outdated book no one had the patience to read. I smiled through the pain and excused myself. I made my way to the door, but before I stepped outside, I caught a glimpse of my son, Daniel, on the porch, talking to a friend on his phone. He didn't even glance in my direction. It wasn't intentional, I'm sure. He didn't mean to hurt me. But sometimes neglect is worse than any direct insult. When the people you love don't even notice that you're fading away, it's like being erased from their lives in slow motion. As I stepped out into the cold, I felt a shift inside me. The familiar weight of loneliness settled on my shoulders once more, but this time it wasn't just sadness that filled me. It was something sharper, a sense of finality, of betrayal. I had always given them everything, my time, my love, my patience, and yet here I was, standing alone in the snow, wondering how it all went so wrong. For 6 years I had accepted their excuses. "You're too far away, Mom. We're busy. Don't worry about it." I'd told myself that it was okay. I'd told myself that it didn't matter. But that little conversation with Lily had cracked something wide open. I realized finally that it wasn't just about the holidays anymore. It was about everything. It was about how, in the end, I had been pushed aside for a life they no longer had any room for, and I couldn't stand it anymore. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the fireplace, staring into the flames, as the snow fell softly outside. My mind raced, going back and forth, trying to find some way to make sense of it all. I knew I couldn't fix what had been broken for so long, but I also knew something had to change. I had spent years trying to convince myself that they loved me, that they would eventually realize how much I meant to them. But I had been wrong. The truth had been staring me in the face for years, and this Christmas, I was going to make sure they saw the truth, too. I couldn't just wait for them to decide to come around. Number this year, I was going to take control. The house they lived in, the one they called their home, was still in my name, under my husband's estate. After Henry passed away, I trusted them. I gave them the house to live in, thinking that they would be grateful, that they would care for it. But instead, I watched them grow distant, watched them grow into people who didn't even want to share a holiday with me. I knew I had to make a decision. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine, that I didn't matter. This year, I was going to do something they never expected. I started to make a plan. It wasn't something I had ever wanted to do, but I knew I had no choice. I found a buyer. I hired a lawyer. I made the arrangements. It wasn't just about the house. It was about taking back what had been taken from me. It was about reclaiming my life. I spent weeks getting everything in order. I wasn't going to let them continue to take me for granted. I had given them enough, and now it was time to let them know just how much I had been holding on to for all these years. This Christmas, everything was going to change, and no one, least of all my children, was going to be ready for what I had planned. The weeks that followed that fateful Christmas Eve were filled with a quiet determination. I moved methodically, every step calculated, though I kept my actions to myself. I didn't want to get anyone's hopes up, least of all my own, but I couldn't go back to the way things were. I'd waited long enough, hoped long enough. Now it was time to take charge. The house, their home, was still in my name. Technically, it was part of Henry's estate, but since he passed away, the property was legally mine to do with as I pleased. At first, I'd told myself that giving them the house was a gesture of love. I wanted them to have a place to live, to feel stable. But stability, as I was learning, had nothing to do with love. They hadn't treated me with respect, hadn't acknowledged how much I had sacrificed for them. They simply took everything I gave, and yet they had no interest in me. As much as I hated the idea, I knew what I had to do. It wasn't a decision I made lightly, but what other choice did I have? I had been patient for so long, waiting for them to see me, to realize that I was still here, still a part of their lives. But they weren't interested in seeing me anymore. I contacted a lawyer, someone I'd known through the years. A professional, someone who understood the law and didn't ask questions. I explained my situation to him. He listened carefully, making notes as I spoke. I felt a strange sense of relief, as if, for the first time in years, someone was actually paying attention to my words, to my story. "I'll help you," he said. "We can have the deed transferred, the sale completed, but you'll need to move quickly." And so I did. Every afternoon, I spent hours sorting through papers, gathering documents, and finalizing the details. The lawyer worked on the legalities, ensuring everything would go through without any complications. But I also knew that I needed something else, something that would ensure my children wouldn't have a chance to ignore what I had done. I had the papers drawn up, the deed, the sale agreement, all of it. I wanted to make sure that when the time came, there would be no way to argue, no way to backpedal. I wanted them to see the finality of it. I hired a notary public to witness everything, someone with the legal authority to affirm the validity of the documents. I bought a new coat, a simple yet elegant piece that made me feel dignified, something that would help me hold my head high. This wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming my life. I had waited too long to be recognized as someone worthy of respect. When everything was ready, I sat alone in the quiet of my house, staring out at the falling snow. It was the first time in years that I didn't feel like I was simply waiting for something to happen. For the first time in so long, I was the one in control. The decision had been made, and now all that was left was to wait for Christmas Eve. I could almost hear my son's voice now, inviting me, telling me that it would be good to have me there, that they wanted me to join them for Christmas. The very words he had spoken to me over the phone just days before. He hadn't known what was coming. How could he? I wasn't just going to show up this year. I was going to bring something with me, something that would make them realize how much they had taken for granted and how much they had lost. I took a deep breath and made my decision. This Christmas, I would not just sit at the table like I had done so many times before, pretending that everything was fine. I wasn't just going to be another guest. I was going to change the game entirely. The papers, the deed, the signatures, everything was ready. All I had to do now was show up, and I would. I would walk into their home, into their perfectly decorated house, with my head held high, knowing that I had the final say in what happened next. This Christmas, they would have to reckon with me. I would no longer be the invisible woman they had left behind. I wasn't just coming to celebrate. I was coming to take back what was rightfully mine. It came at the end of November, just as the last of the autumn leaves had fallen. My son, Daniel, called me one evening, his voice warmer than I'd heard it in a long time. Mom, we've been talking, and we want you to come for Christmas this year. You should be with us, you know? The kids would love to see you, and, well, it's just not the same without you. I froze. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The words I had waited so many years to hear, my son finally inviting me, had come, but they were not as sweet as I imagined. I heard the hesitation in his voice, the uncomfortable tone that suggested he was merely fulfilling some kind of obligation, rather than offering genuine warmth. I knew it wasn't a heartfelt invitation. It was a duty, something they probably discussed among themselves, feeling guilty for neglecting me for so long. But still, it was something. It was at least a glimmer of recognition that I was still part of their lives, at least for now. I breathed in slowly and then replied, "Of course, Daniel. I'll be there. I wouldn't miss it for the world." The words were easy to say, but inside a knot formed in my stomach. It wasn't just the invitation that made my pulse quicken. It was the realization of what this moment represented. I had spent the last 6 years excusing their behavior, telling myself it didn't matter, convincing myself I was fine with the loneliness, with being left out. But now, as I prepared to go, I knew something had shifted irrevocably. I wasn't going to be the same woman who showed up meekly at their door, hoping to blend in. I was going to walk in with the truth in my hands, a truth they had refused to see for so long. Over the next few days, I made preparations. I didn't just buy any coat. I bought one that made me feel strong, a deep green wool coat that fit perfectly. I wanted to feel dignified, not like a visitor at their table, but like someone who belonged. I arranged for the notary to meet me a few days before Christmas. He was a man of few words, but efficient, and I could sense his respect for what I was doing. He didn't ask questions, but I could tell he understood the importance of the task at hand. We met at his office, and I signed the documents in front of him, confirming the transfer of ownership. He stamped the papers and gave me copies. The final step was a small but crucial detail. I had made sure that my lawyer had informed my son and daughter-in-law, just days before Christmas, that the house was no longer in their name. There was no going back. It wasn't about making them suffer, about punishing them. It was about taking back my autonomy, reclaiming what had been so easily disregarded, and they would know exactly who had done it. With everything ready, I packed a small bag. I would be there for Christmas, yes, but not in the way they expected. I drove to my son's house on Christmas Eve, the snow falling softly around me as I neared their neighborhood. The house was already lit up, a garland draped across the front door, wreaths in the windows. Inside, I knew the table would be set, the Christmas tree sparkling in the corner, the children laughing and playing. It would be festive, warm, filled with food and cheer. But beneath all that, there would be a tension, an undercurrent of something else, something they didn't expect. As I pulled into their driveway, I felt a wave of calm wash over me. This was it. I wasn't going there to beg for their affection, to apologize for my absence, or to pretend that everything was fine. I was going there to take control of my own story. The door swung open before I could knock. Daniel stood there, his face lit up in the glow of the Christmas lights. His smile was tentative, almost cautious, as if he was unsure of how to greet me after all these years of silence. "Mom," he said softly, stepping aside to let me in. "I'm really glad you could make it." I smiled, trying to push the feeling of coldness in my chest down. "Of course, Daniel. I wouldn't miss it." I entered their home, the familiar smells of Christmas wrapping around me: roast turkey, cinnamon, the unmistakable scent of pine. I felt a sense of disconnect, like I was entering a world I no longer belonged to. The children were playing by the fireplace, laughing as they raced around. The soft hum of holiday music played in the background, and I saw Julia in the kitchen, bustling about with an air of controlled chaos. "Mom, you came," Julia said with a bright smile, but there was something in her eyes, something guarded, as though she wasn't sure what to expect from me. She didn't give me a hug, but I didn't expect her to. I hadn't expected anything from her for years. The children, Lily and her younger brother Ethan, barely spared me a glance as they continued their play. I could feel the chill in the air, though no one had said a word to make it so. But I could tell that they weren't used to me being here. It had been too long. I took a deep breath and set my bag down by the fireplace. "I brought gifts, too," I said, my voice calm, steady. They looked at me, surprised, but I wasn't talking about presents wrapped in pretty paper. I reached into my bag, and from inside I pulled out the envelope, thick, official-looking, with the legal stamp of my lawyer's office on it. I could feel Daniel's eyes on me, could sense the shift in the air, the moment the mood in the room began to change. "This," I said, holding the envelope up for him to see, "is the gift I'm giving this year." The room fell eerily quiet as I held up the envelope. The flickering lights of the Christmas tree seemed to cast a strange, almost sinister glow on the paper, making it look far more significant than it really was. And yet, in that moment, it was everything. I could hear the faint hum of the Christmas music in the background, the soft chatter of my grandchildren as they played, but none of it mattered. All that mattered was the silence that hung heavy between us. Daniel stood frozen, his smile faltering as he looked from me to the envelope. Julia, her back still to me, suddenly stopped what she was doing, her hands stilled at the sink, her shoulders tensing. The children, oblivious to the sudden shift in atmosphere, continued to race around the room. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the weight of the moment pressing against me. But I didn't flinch. I had come prepared for this. For too many years, I had allowed myself to be nothing more than a shadow in their lives, a shadow that had finally come into the light, demanding to be seen. I stepped forward, slowly, deliberately, and placed the envelope on the table. It made a soft, resounding sound as it hit the wood, as if it were echoing through the room. "I know it's Christmas," I said, my voice calm but firm, "but this is the gift I have for you." Daniel opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. He stared at the envelope, his face pale, his brow furrowed with confusion. I wasn't sure what he was expecting, maybe a wrapped box or a bottle of wine. But not this, not what I had in store for him. I watched his face change, the realization dawning on him. Julia turned slowly, her expression shifting from curiosity to apprehension. She wiped her hands on a dish towel and stepped toward us, her eyes narrowing. "What is this, Mom?" Daniel asked, his voice edged with something that could have been panic, though he was trying to keep it under control. "What's going on?" I looked at him, meeting his eyes for the first time since I'd arrived. There was no warmth there, no lingering affection. He was a man now, not the boy who used to sit on my lap and tell me everything. And it wasn't just him, it was all of them. They had moved on, leaving me behind, and now it was my turn to do the same. "This," I said, "is the new deed to the house." I watched as the words landed, as his face shifted from confusion to something closer to disbelief. Julia blinked, and then her face tightened in a way that made my chest tighten in return. But I held my ground, my gaze unwavering. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice rising just slightly. "You can't, this is our home. It's where we live. You can't just—" "I did," I interrupted gently, my voice as steady as it had been from the start. "I did just that. The house is no longer yours. It's been transferred to someone else. The new owner will be here shortly." The room was now thick with tension. I saw Daniel take a step back, his hands instinctively gripping the edge of the table, as if trying to steady himself, trying to make sense of something he clearly couldn't. Julia stood frozen, her face pale, her lips pressed together tightly. "You can't do this, Mom," Daniel shouted suddenly, his voice strained. "We've been living here for years. You can't just—" "I didn't just do this on a whim," I replied quietly, my voice soft but resolute. "I've spent the last year planning this. When you stopped seeing me as part of this family, when you stopped inviting me to Christmas, to any of the important moments, I knew it was time. Time for me to do something for myself. Time for me to stop pretending that I was invisible." Julia's eyes flicked toward me, a mixture of anger and something else, maybe fear, flashing across her face. "You don't get to take this away from us," she said, her voice a little more controlled, but still trembling. "You have no right." I shook my head. "I have every right. It was my house, my husband's house. When he passed away, it became mine. I trusted you both to look after it, but it's clear you stopped caring about me long before you stopped caring about the house." Daniel was now pacing, his face a mask of frustration and confusion. "You're ruining Christmas," he spat. "This isn't the time for this. Why now? Why not just let things go? Why do this to us, Mom?" I could feel the tension building in my chest, but I kept my composure. I wasn't here to yell or argue. I wasn't here to make them feel bad or even to make them regret their choices. I was here because it was time for them to face the consequences of their actions. I had been patient, too patient, for too long. "This isn't about ruining Christmas, Daniel," I said quietly. "This is about taking back what's mine. I gave and gave and gave, and in the end, all you saw me as was a burden. But I'm not your burden anymore. I'm not your responsibility. I'm free." The doorbell rang suddenly, cutting through the thick silence. It was the final moment. The new owner had arrived. I watched as Daniel and Julia exchanged a quick glance. Their faces turned pale as they heard the muffled voice from outside, confirming what they had feared. The new owner stepped inside, a tall man with a confident stride and a warm handshake. He introduced himself to me, his eyes sparkling with something that looked like amusement. He looked at my children, who were both standing stock still, their faces flushed with shock. "I'm just here to sign the paperwork," the man said, nodding politely to them. And then, without a word, he handed over the contract, sealed with his signature. Daniel's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Julia stood there, her face contorted with disbelief. "No more words are needed," I said, my voice final. I turned and walked toward the door, not looking back. There would be no explanation, no further words. They had their answers. I had my peace. The house was no longer theirs. And Christmas would be mine. The door closed behind me with a soft click. The air outside was cold, but it didn't matter. The chill was nothing compared to the warmth of the small victory I had just claimed. My hand gripped the strap of my bag as I stepped down the front steps, the crunch of snow beneath my boots the only sound in the stillness of the night. Behind me, the door opened again, and I heard the muffled voices inside, rising now in panic. Daniel's voice was sharp, his words cutting through the air like the wind that whipped around me. "Mom, you can't do this. You can't just throw us out like this." But I didn't turn around. I didn't need to hear any more. I had done what I came to do, and now they could deal with the consequences. They had forgotten me when it mattered most, when I needed them to see me not as a mother, but as a person. And now, in the one moment when they had expected nothing more than their usual holiday comfort, I had forced them to confront the truth. For 6 years, they had refused to invite me to Christmas, and yet I had given them everything. I had raised them, supported them, loved them, and watched as they grew up, as they became more distant with each passing year. I had been patient, waiting for the moment when they would finally see me again. But that moment never came. They had moved on, with their busy lives, their new families, their new priorities. I was left behind, forgotten, but not anymore. I pulled my coat tighter around me, the fabric warm against the cold bite of the night. There was something almost poetic about this moment, about the contrast between the warmth of the home I had just left and the freezing cold that now surrounded me. The snow was falling more heavily now, each flake adding to the layer of cold that was blanketing the world. I welcomed it. The world outside was cold, but that was nothing compared to the isolation I had felt for years. I reached the curb, and just as I was about to step into the taxi waiting for me, I heard the door open again. This time it was Julia. She didn't call out to me, but I could see her silhouette in the glow of the house lights. She stood there for a moment, her figure framed by the warmth inside, before she stepped forward, hesitating at the top of the stairs. "Mom," she called, her voice quiet but strained. "Please, just come back inside. We can talk about this." I didn't stop. I didn't even look back. There was nothing left to say. The taxi door opened with a soft thud, and I slid into the warmth of the car, the driver giving me a polite nod as he pulled away from the curb. Through the back window, I saw the house recede into the distance, the lights flickering faintly as the night swallowed it up. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of that house on my shoulders. It was no longer my burden. I didn't need to be inside with them. I didn't need their approval, their love, their acceptance. I had done what I needed to do. I had taken back what was mine, and in the process, I had reclaimed myself. The taxi sped down the road, the city lights flashing by in a blur. Ahead of me was an apartment I had recently rented, small but cozy. The heat would be on, and the fireplace would crackle softly as I settled in for the evening. A cat I had adopted a few months ago would be waiting for me, curled up on the couch, a small comfort in a world that had often felt cold. I smiled to myself as I thought about that cat. It had been with me through the hardest of times, a little bundle of warmth and softness. In a world that had moved on without me, it had never once turned its back. As we drove, I allowed myself to relax for the first time in what felt like forever. The tension that had built up over the past year, the anger, the loneliness, the resignation, began to melt away. I was free, free from the expectations that had held me prisoner for so long, free from the people who had taken me for granted. And Christmas, despite everything, was still Christmas. It was still a time for renewal, for change, for taking control of your own fate. I looked out the window, watching as the city blurred by, the snow still falling softly from the sky. The taxi made its way through the streets, and I thought about how much had changed, how much I had changed. The woman who had walked into that house tonight was not the same woman who had stepped out of her own home all those years ago. I was no longer someone who would quietly wait for the phone calls, for the invitations that never came. I had learned the hard way that if you wait for someone to see you, you may never be seen at all. When I arrived at the apartment, I stepped out of the taxi and into the cold once again. This time, however, the cold didn't seem as oppressive. The world was still, and everything around me was quiet, peaceful in a way it had never been before. Inside, the fire crackled as I kicked off my boots and made my way into the living room. The cat was already there, curled up on the couch, and as soon as I sat down, it came to me, nuzzling against my leg. I smiled and stroked its soft fur, feeling its warmth seep into me. I sat back on the couch, letting the fire and the cat's gentle presence fill the space. This was my home now, my place of peace. The house I had once shared with my family no longer held any power over me. What mattered now was the life I had ahead of me, a life that no one could take from me. I could finally breathe. For the first time in years, I felt like I was truly home. Christmas, the holiday I had once dreaded, now felt like mine again. I raised my glass of wine, my toast to myself. For the first time in a long time, I was no longer invisible. The night stretched out before me, peaceful and still, the world outside my small apartment frozen under a blanket of snow. Through the window, I could see the twinkling lights of the city, the faint glow of street lamps casting shadows on the ground. It was as though the whole world had paused, taking a breath before the dawn of a new year. I settled deeper into the couch, my feet tucked under a soft blanket. The fire crackled gently, its warmth wrapping around me like a hug. The cat, content in its own little world, had fallen asleep by my side, its rhythmic breathing a reminder of the quiet comfort I had longed for. I had known this night would come, maybe not exactly like this, but I had known that I would one day reach a point where I no longer needed to wait for my children, for my family, for the ones who had moved on and forgotten that I existed, except when they needed something from me. For the first time in years, I felt whole. It wasn't anger that had driven me tonight. It wasn't resentment or bitterness, though those feelings had come and gone over the years. No, it was something far quieter. It was dignity, a calm, quiet recognition of my own worth, a realization that no one else had the power to define me, not even the children I had raised. When I walked into that house earlier, I had been prepared to confront them with the documents, with the legal papers that would strip them of the house they had taken for granted. But it wasn't the shock on their faces that gave me satisfaction. It wasn't their panic or their frantic pleas. It was the silence that followed, the silence that spoke volumes. That moment when they realized they had underestimated me, when they saw that I was no longer the woman they could push aside, the mother they could ignore. I had taken control, and they were powerless to stop it. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't demanded their attention. All I had done was present the truth, an undeniable, legal truth. And in doing so, I had taken my place back, in the only way that mattered, with dignity. As I sat there, the firelight flickering, I thought about the years I had spent waiting for their calls, for their love, for their acknowledgement. I thought about how I had given up so much of myself for them, how I had sacrificed pieces of my own happiness in the hopes that one day they would see me, that one day they would return to me the love and care I had given them. But they never did. Tonight, I had let go. I had closed the door on a chapter of my life that had long been over. I had come to terms with the fact that my children, no matter how much I had loved them, no matter how much I had given, were not going to change. They were not going to suddenly see me as a person, as an individual, as someone who mattered beyond being their mother, and that was okay, because I had learned to matter to myself. The apartment was quiet now, save for the soft crackling of the fire and the cat's steady breathing. I glanced at the clock on the wall. It was almost midnight, the start of a new year, the start of a new chapter. I felt a strange sense of peace, the kind of peace that only comes when you finally stop fighting, when you let go of what you cannot control and accept what is. My children were no longer my responsibility. They were adults now, with their own lives to live. And me? I was free. Free to live my own life, to embrace what was left of my time. I raised my glass again, this time in a toast to the future, to the life I had left, to the moments of joy and peace that awaited me, far away from the ghosts of the past. Christmas would never be the same, but somehow this Christmas felt right. For the first time in many years, I was not waiting. I wasn't hoping for some grand reconciliation, some miracle to bring my family back together. Instead, I was exactly where I needed to be, by myself, but not alone, surrounded by warmth, by quiet contentment. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes, letting the fire's warmth seep deeper into my bones. The past had been painful, yes, but the future was mine to shape. And for the first time, I knew exactly what that future would look like. It would be mine.